Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Left Hook podcast. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, James.
Jordie, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, thanks.
Very good.
We're trying something a little bit different this week. We're using a streaming software so that we can play videos and in the future have guests on. So bear with us as we try and iron this out.
Yes, we may have some technical difficulties, but I think we should be pretty good to just get straight into it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, man.
So, as always, we've got a great show ahead of us.
Yes.
There are interesting and concerning things going on around the world for us to talk about. And so...
Again, this will be another global pod. We'll be talking about the Middle East. We'll be talking about some things that are happening here in Australia. Also, a bit of discussion about the recent Hurricane Helene, which has impacted the southeastern section of the United States, leaving hundreds of thousands of people without power and stranded, etc. I do think it's quite funny, Jordie, because if any of our audience remembers, at the end of our last episode, I believe you said something along the lines of, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it was something along the lines of, I guarantee the next time we do an episode, there will have been further escalations in the Middle East.
Correct. So
and there have been some pretty big escalations in the Middle East.
Massive escalations. Yes. So at the end of the last podcast, we were discussing
the pager attack,
the pager terror attacks on Lebanon by Israel. And since then, boy, oh boy, have things escalated, to say the least. So just what we'll do is, to begin with, we'll be talking about the past since Friday last week, when Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, was assassinated in Beirut, Lebanon, by the Israelis. Yep. There has been an ongoing attack on Lebanon. So, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry, since last Friday, there have been over 2,000 civilians killed in the bombing. This has included 127 children, 261 women, and it has displaced 1.2 million people inside Lebanon, many of them fleeing over the border into Syria.
Well, the situation is getting more and more dire for the people in Lebanon. And it also mirrors what the Israeli military warned they were going to do. I believe they said we're going to turn Beirut into another Gaza Strip, something along those lines. And they seem to be wasting no time in doing such a thing.
That's right.
They've really ramped up their bombing campaign. So we've seen residential tower buildings, mainly in the Dahia district, I believe, of Beirut. So we've seen residential towers, being entire blocks being taken out. As you said, healthcare workers being targeted as well.
Yeah.
And the situation is getting, pretty scary. It's heating up.
Yes, definitely.
We have also found that the Israelis have started essentially trying to push troops into the south of Lebanon on the ground.
Yeah. Although
it doesn't seem to have been heaps successful so far. This is probably over the last 4 days or so, I'd say.
Yes.
This is, I think, how they've since they started this incursion, or we could just call it an invasion, call it what it is.
Yeah.
So to my knowledge, again, what's been reported is that we found that they have faced stiff resistance from Hezbollah forces in the south of Lebanon. The Israelis have reported about 250 Hezbollah fighters killed.
That's what they've said. The Israeli government is confirming, and the Israeli government also confirmed that there was 8 IDF soldiers killed in the fighting, and several other members critically injured. And I thought we'd just also should probably add some context, because since Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated last Friday, there's been a lot of discussion in the Australian media and the global media about who Hezbollah is and who Hassan Nasrallah is. Obviously, in the West here, we label the group as a terrorist organization, and you've been doing a little bit of research.
Yeah, look, this is, again, one of those things that to kind of really understand the kind of political makeup of Lebanon today, you'd have to go back to like the Ottoman Empire. We're going to kind of condense it all just a bit, into a shorter amount of time. Hezbollah were essentially formed in the mid-1980s, early to mid-1980s. There isn't actually proper consensus on the exact date that they were formed as an official group. Essentially, they were, however, formed in response to the Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon as well.
This is in 1982.
And this is kind of towards the end of the Lebanese civil war period, in which Lebanon was divided up into kind of numerous areas that were occupied. So you had the Syrians and etc. So what happened was the Hezbollah is essentially a Shia group, a Shia Muslim group. So the Shias in Lebanon had traditionally been on the quite a bit poorer and quite a bit more impoverished, as opposed to the kind of the Maronite Christian sect, which was kind of always in the ruling the ruling sphere of power, and the Sunnis as well. So what happened was the Iranian IRGC sent a contingent of soldiers into Lebanon to start essentially training and arming a cadre of people to essentially fight against Israel, and that kind of group is what became Lebanon. So they have a strong Shia ideology behind them. But more than that, they use that and harness that ideology in essentially as an anti-imperialist force. So they see their role as fighting against US, European, and Zionist imperialism, and they want a free and sovereign Lebanon. And also the sovereignty to be able to choose their allies, as they are allied with Iran. So it's interesting as well, because they have been the only force that has been able to essentially assert any sovereignty over Lebanon as well.
And that's partly because the Lebanon does not have a strong central government or a strong military. So Hezbollah kind of takes that place. It fills in the void.
Of course. And so they pushed out the Israeli forces in the 1980s and again in 2006 when the Israelis again invaded further. So since 1992, they have been led by Hassan Nasrallah, who was again assassinated last week. This has seen a massive outpouring of grief all over the Middle Eastern world, and including in Venezuela as well. For example, there was I think Maduro came out and did a speech, lamenting his death. Obviously, so he was a very popular figure, and not just amongst Muslims, but also, or not just amongst Shia Muslims, but also amongst Christians and amongst Sunnis as well. He was kind of again seen as a unifying figure in Lebanon. It's important to note one of the reasons Hezbollah is so hated by the West is they were one of the main forces, along with the Syrian Arab Army and the IRGC and Russian forces, that were actually instrumental in defeating the Islamic State. So when the Islamic State were rampaging through Iraq and Syria with no protest really from the West, from the Western governments and from the Israelis, for example, and obviously maybe getting a bit of funding from them as well on the side, the forces that did defeat them was a coalition of forces. Hezbollah, the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Syrian Arab Army, which is the Syrian government army, not to be confused with the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, which were a Western-backed proxy force that got absorbed into the kind of al-Nusra Front.
Just going to slow down.
No, slow me down, please.
So Hezbollah went over and fought inside Syria. Against ISIS. I believe they sent about 10,000 men, and they took heavy losses. I think only about 5,000 returned from memory. So they were instrumental in defeating ISIS alongside the Iranian military. And at the time were also supported, I believe, by Western forces, including the United States, who provided air support.
Yes and no. It was flaky. It was a flaky thing, because you would have times, for example, you had times where even Australian fighter jets went over there and they would be, for example, bombing the Syrian government, the Syrian government's positions. And then there were other times where I think when it became politically untenable in the West, especially after ISIS kind of broke out of the Middle East and started committing terrorist attacks in Europe and in England, for example. And that's when I think there was a bit of a political shift in the West. So there was some assistance, but there was also the kind of the more covert assistance for these for the other forces.
So there's a strong argument to put forwards that Hezbollah more is a national liberation movement. For Lebanon. And you can see Hassan Nasrallah as more of a kind of figure similar to, say, Fidel Castro or Ho Chi Minh. In Vietnam.
I think he would be likened to a Shia Ho Chi Minh.
And that's why there's a lot of support amongst the Arab world, and especially in Lebanon, for him and for his group, which obviously is designated as a terrorist organization here in Australia.
Another thing to note, which is kind of funny, and it's a bit of a thought experiment for our audience, anyone out there, is that, for example, the IRGC, designated as a terrorist organization, the Syrian government is also designated, they kind of have the enemy state designation. The Russians definitely have the enemy state designation.
That's right, yeah.
And Hezbollah have the terrorist designation.
Yeah.
All of these forces were the ones that fought ISIS.
Correct.
So
a real terrorist
organization. Yeah. So there's just a bit of food for thought.
No, definitely, of course. And I think while we're talking about that, it's interesting that we got to remember back during the Vietnam War, Australia designated the North Vietnamese and Ho Chi Minh as a terrorist group and terrorist organization, and we also did the same to Nelson Mandela
and the ANC, the African National Congress.
Which obviously defeated apartheid in South Africa.
Yes.
So I think it's important to remember: don't let your governments or your media establishment tell you who the terrorists are. Maybe do some research for yourself, actually look into these groups, these movements, what they've done, and then make the decision for yourself instead of turning on the mainstream media and just consuming what they tell you.
Absolutely. And it doesn't as well. That also doesn't mean that these groups are above criticism.
No, of course
we should have the room to be able to criticize and essentially express critical thinking. But I think with a bit more of a contextual explanation, for me personally, I find it very difficult to buy the complete mainstream media narrative on these groups. And it's also interesting to note that the majority of the world population, governments that represent the majority of the world population, do not consider these groups terrorist groups.
No, they don't. That's right.
And also the official kind of Western definition of terrorism states that it cannot be a state actor. So therefore, the United States or France or Britain or Israel, the Zionist entity, they can commit acts of terror against civilian populations, yet that is not designated as terrorism.
So you're telling me that the pager attacks that Israel orchestrated in Lebanon wasn't a terrorist attack then?
Well, not according to the Western definition, Jordie.
No, that's right.
But as we discussed last week, we read out the definition of terrorism, which I actually have up here, which is the unlawful use of violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is important because Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong in the Australian government,
exalted leaders,
did not condemn the pager attacks, for which I think we can fairly say was an act of terror.
Yeah.
They have not condemned the invasion
of Lebanon
by Israel.
They have not condemned the genocide in Gaza by Israel either.
They're concerned about the humanitarian crisis.
Yes, they are. Yes. So
unfolding.
That shows how the language that these people use, can kind of subconsciously paint a certain picture.
Yeah, of course.
That, again, justifies their position.
We've actually got a video here of Anthony Albanese,
our exalted leader,
condemning Iran's attack. So Iran launched several hundred, I think it was about 200 missiles.
That's the estimate.
About 200 ballistic missiles into Israel the other day, including some hypersonic missiles as well.
And this was Iran, this operation was called, I believe it was called Truthful Promise 2, I believe. And this was in response to, obviously, their first drone strike a couple months ago was in response to the bombing of the Syrian consulate, of the Iranian consulate in Damascus. And this was in response to, was it the assassination
of Ismail
Haniyeh in Tehran, which was an act of terror committed on Iranian sovereign territory again. And it's important to note as well, so they essentially, I think lots of people have probably seen the footage of lots of these missiles coming in. It's also important to note that they did not target civilians, from what we can see. Israel has not actually reported any civilians killed, any Israelis. There was one Palestinian that was killed by falling shrapnel, I believe, which was shown on Israeli media as if they care about dying Palestinians, which is quite amusing.
So they mostly targeted, from our understanding, it was military runways and air bases, and a Mossad building as well. I believe one of the Israeli intelligence buildings as well.
Yes, to be reported. But again, as Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, they have put a gag order on all journalists operating inside Israel. So everything has to go through the military censor.
And they've banned any critical media outlets, such as Al Jazeera, from operating. So all of the information that we're getting is coming out of Israel itself from the government. So they produce a press release and information, and then Australian media companies use those press releases as factual evidence.
Of course.
Which makes it very difficult to actually understand what is going on at the moment.
Yeah. But then again, they also, again, based on what they have been supplying our media publicly, no one was killed by these strikes from Iran.
Yes.
As contrasted sharply by their ruthless saturation bombing of Lebanon, again, which has again killed mainly civilians.
So we should play this video of Anthony Albanese condemning these attacks, which I think is quite telling in his reply.
Of course, condemn Iran's actions. Israel, of course, has a right to defend itself.
But he's stopped short of saying that right extends into southern Lebanon.
We regard Hezbollah as a terrorist organisation, as we regard Hamas as a terrorist organisation.
The opposition leader claims the Prime Minister is too weak in his support of Israel, pointing to Foreign Minister Penny Wong's speech to the UN General Assembly on the weekend, calling for a clear timeline to Palestinian statehood.
The Prime Minister has walked away from a bipartisan position adopted by every one of his predecessors.
The coalition's policy on whether to designate Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation is less clear.
That'll be a decision for the Director General of ASIO to make a recommendation to the government.
The coalition has been calling for some time now, years in fact, for the Albanese government to take the action of listing the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation.
Anthony Albanese is walking a fine line. He supports Israel's right to defend itself.
So there we go.
We condemn. It is condemnation and concern, and he's very select with those words that are used.
Correct. So did not condemn the Pager attack.
No.
Did not condemn the invasion of South Lebanon.
No.
But did condemn the retaliatory strike by Iran.
Yes.
So really picking and choosing what actions he would like to condemn and framing Iran here as the kind of single aggressor that is trying to start this conflict.
And I think if we take, the kind of the general neocon Western talking points, Iran is this kind of this regional monster that sinks its tentacles into every single country and is a huge threat. However, I think they've been, as the Iranian foreign minister explained, they've been very restrained. This is only the second time, despite all the, decades of Israeli sabotage, terrorism, attacks on Iran, violations of international law, assassinating scientists, for example, in Iran, sabotaging the Iran nuclear deal with the United States. Iran has never really formally retaliated in such a way. And I think it's very interesting that now they have chosen to do such a thing. The Israelis have also come out and said, well, we're going to hit you back even harder because of your retaliation to us. And the Iranians have said, well, if you do that, then we will also hit back harder.
A couple interesting points from that video as well is the way that Peter Dutton tries to play the kind of strong on defense card and tries to frame Anthony Albanese as being really weak on these issues. So, for example, Penny Wong delivered a speech at the United Nations calling for a immediate kind of progression towards a two-state solution for Palestine and allowing Palestine to have statehood. And it's interesting then that Peter Dutton comes out and condemns that message because that is the actual government's official position.
That's our official policy.
Our official position is for a two-state solution to the conflict. And it's funny that it's funny that Penny Wong went up and actually said that and basically just reiterated the government's position. And Dutton just tries to frame her as being kind of,
being weak.
Not just being weak, as if though they're splitting from the official position. And trying to play into domestic politics.
Technically, he's the one splitting from the consensus position and playing domestic politics.
That's right.
I also hope that Israel doesn't actually succeed in making Beirut as bare as Peter Dutton said. So he's just a very uncharismatic man. He does not inspire confidence.
No, he doesn't.
And really plays on this kind of really dirty style of politics, I find.
I was just about to say,
it's like a really
dirty style of politics.
As we've discussed in the past, it would be very easy for him to make actually just criticisms of the Labor Party. I have many criticisms of the Labor Party in power. But he just reduces it to this bottom of the barrel,
it's horrible. He just tries to bait them into these terrible positions,
and then that again pushes them further and further to the right.
And interesting as well, there was Simon Birmingham calling for the government, the Australian government, to list the Iranian military as a terrorist organisation. We're just talking about
then, and again, as a state actor, as a terrorist organisation, it's again pick and choosing who they designate terrorists as essentially. Interesting to note as well, in regards to the ceasefire, it has come out, I believe a Lebanese government official
was on CNN.
And he was not, so we don't have this clip here, unfortunately, sorry for the audience, but he was actually saying that they were looking at Hezbollah and the Israelis were actually looking at making a 21-day ceasefire and kind of making progression towards that. And that happened just before Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated.
Yeah.
So I think, as we've discussed in the past as well, no country in the region does want escalation apart from Israel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way Iran has been reacting specifically as well, and even Hezbollah to an extent, is trying to very much limit the escalation. So a strong response, but then saying this matter is now settled.
Hang on a sec. Didn't one of the Israeli spokesmen come out the other day and said that we need to escalate to de-escalate? And that is a direct quote, a direct quote from him.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that makes sense.
Yeah.
That seems like a very contradictory idea.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll see how that works for Israel.
Yeah.
Escalating to de-escalate.
Yeah.
But considering they are getting even more kind of surrounded by hostile actors based on their belligerence and their disregard for everyone else's sovereignty.
That's right. Their continued desire to lash out and expand. And while speaking of expansion, actually, you may not have watched in whole, and I do not blame you, but Tim Walz and JD Vance debating.
I've seen a clip or two.
Okay, we've got a clip here, actually. A really good clip of Tim Walz. And neither of us have figured out whether this is a Freudian slip or whether this is the kind of official democratic position on Israel. Anyway.
At this stage, I would not be surprised either way.
No, that's right. Okay, so let's play this clip, because this is just, this is something else.
Tim Walz.
And thank you for those joining at home tonight. Let's keep in mind where this started. October 7th, Hamas terrorists massacred over 1,400 Israelis and took prisoners. Israel's ability to be able to defend itself is absolutely fundamental. Getting its hostages back, fundamental, and ending the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our...
Sorry.
He said it. He said the thing.
Sorry. Did he just say the ongoing expansion of Israel and its proxies?
I think he did, dude. I'm not sure if he meant to say, like he said, Iran.
Yeah, but he says an official position the United States supports.
Yeah. Well, there you go. He said it out loud. He said it
and he also, loud. Yeah, and he also he accidentally also said Iran instead of Israel at the beginning. There.
He did. And I think
so. It's kind of hard to tell where the Freudian slips are, where the genuine slips are when you're in front of a lot of people debating. Yeah. It's really hard to kind of to tell. But he did just say there that we do support the expansion of Israel and its proxies.
I love there at the end. JD Vance is kind of looking at him like giving him one of these, and he's just like, because obviously. The Uniparty Israel has bipartisan support. There's going to be no difference. So JD Vance's, policy is going to be exactly the same. And I think he was kind of looking at him there being like, you're not meant to say that part out loud, man. But look, poor Tim Walz, man. Like, when they first announced he was going to be Kamala Harris's VP, and I saw like a whole bunch of like quite positive stuff about him in the press. And I was like, oh, this could be nice. But like looking at him there in that debate, like I wouldn't call myself a smart person, and I can recognize a dumb person when I see one, and he looks like a fish out of water.
Well, he's a high school teacher. He hasn't been a career politician.
That's refreshing. I know he's genuinely refreshing.
He's a governor and it's genuinely refreshing. But yeah, maybe he's not the brightest teacher either. I don't know.
No, just from his facial expression there. Yeah. And again, look, JD Vance isn't much better. I do think JD Vance is probably
a bit more cunning.
A bit more cunning. And ruthless. But again, he was kind of birthed out of like the Silicon Valley, Peter Thiel, deep state, womb, which just spat him out into the world.
That's right. While we're actually discussing Israeli expansion, I've seen some photos this week. And this was news to me. I'm sure they've been circulating for a while, but it's a patch on the IDF soldier's arm. And it shows a picture of Greater Israel next to the Star of David.
I have seen that as
which is really interesting to see.
And it shows, I think it's one of those patches of like the special forces or whatever would wear.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure it's from the Euphrates to the Suez Canal.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's kind of the rough idea. So
Correct.
it's like all of the Sinai,
which encompasses part now of obviously Egypt, Saudi Arabia, most of Lebanon.
Yeah, so yeah, be like Syria, Turkey,
yep.
Lebanon, Iraq,
yep.
exactly. So, and look, it's not like when Tim Walz is talking about Israeli expansion, it's not like this is an unfounded idea, because they do have these psychopaths in the Israeli government who's, especially the Likud party, who their main goal is to, again, expand to Greater Israel. And that's what we're seeing now in Gaza, is the ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the ongoing attempted ethnic cleansing of the West Bank.
Correct.
And it is quite tragic, but they are a bit too open about it, and they are very belligerent about the whole situation.
That's right. And while you actually mentioned Gaza, we've got to remember that Israel is continuing to bomb Gaza.
Yes.
And in fact, I think just in the past few days, they bombed a refugee camp, which killed 51 people, including women and children.
Yeah. And that's
so as the conflict has now become, I keep saying the word conflict, as Israel has invaded South Lebanon, obviously that is where the media's attention has gone, and it's gone away from what's happening in Gaza, and it's allowed Israel to continue the ongoing genocide.
Yeah, exactly. And then that is the real sad thing as well. It is because I think, like I said, the focus is shifting. But for the people there in Gaza, again, the horrors are just going to continue. And also in the West Bank as well, with Al Jazeera being the only media office that was kind of, only kind of big international media that was critical of Israel in the West Bank, with them being shut down. I personally am worried about kind of the increase in settler violence as well. Especially if, the Israeli military and the government, the kind of Ben Gvir type characters just kind of give them a bit more of a free rein to terrorize the Palestinians. So again, it's really important to remember that's still going on as well.
And as the invasion into Lebanon began and the assassination of Nasrallah, there was mass demonstrations here in Australia last week, especially in Sydney and in Melbourne.
We have big Lebanese communities.
Yeah, that's right.
Massive Lebanese communities.
And there was a bit of controversy because there were some people that seemed to have had Hezbollah flags. And there was many photos that I saw, placards printed out of Hassan Nasrallah's face.
Exactly, yes.
And in fact, there was a ABC journalist reporting, and in the background, there was heaps of people just waving photos of Hassan Nasrallah.
Exactly. And it shows...
terrified the Australian political and media establishment here. Absolutely terrified them.
But I think the thought of a strong leader terrifies them.
It does terrify them. You're right.
The sort of having a leader that the common public actually look up to and are passionate about supporting, that terrifies. That is the worst nightmare of our liberal centrist elite.
So there was calls from both sides of the aisle, from the Labor Party and from the coalition, to hold these people responsible. And P. Dutton came out and said that he wanted visas to be cancelled. And Tony Burke, also from the Labor Party, said the same thing, the Home Affairs Minister. And what I found interesting about this was it was just kind of an assumption that anyone at the rally that either had a Hezbollah flag or had seen supporting Hassan Nasrallah, for some reason was on a visa. They weren't an Australian citizen.
Yeah, of course.
It's just kind of an assumption that anyone that was there and looked remotely Middle Eastern was not an Australian citizen.
Yeah, and foreign actactors, for example.
And to this day, no visas have been cancelled, from my understanding, when I checked this morning. I believe one woman, I think a 20-year-old woman, did hand herself into police for having a Hezbollah flag, which obviously, because it is designated a terrorist organization, you cannot display images or flags of said organization.
Yes.
So...
again, that's kind of funny. Again, I just bring it back to, look, we live in Australia, and imagine if you were an Indigenous Australian and you wanted to be like, hey, these people don't belong here. It'd be kind of a funny kind of juxtaposition.
That's right. As well. And actually, there are going to be other mass demonstrations across Australia in support of Lebanon and the Palestinians this weekend. And the New South Police went to the state Supreme Court to try and ban these demonstrations. Because, God forbid, in a Western liberal democracy, we could have freedom of expression and freedom of assembly and have such demonstrations. So we're going to say? Go on.
Oh, no, by all means, continue.
I was going to say, and this appeal to the Supreme Court was withdrawn, thank God. But it was done so through negotiation. So apparently there was going to be demonstrations this Sunday and Monday, obviously marking the 1-year anniversary of October 7th attack.
Operation Al-Aqsa flood.
Correct. And the organisation of the demonstrations has said that they will hold a vigil instead. It won't be kind of a demonstration. And that the concern of the New South Wales police was over safety concerns.
Of course,
even though all the demonstrations have been peaceful, I don't think a single person has been arrested in the past year for any sort of violent or aggressive behaviour.
We've been to a couple, and there has never been any sort of violence.
Definitely not.
Even the police have been pretty respectful as well. Actually, on all sides, it's been a very respectful.
The police have been very professional about this, 100%.
And all the protesters have been very professional as well.
What I found interesting though was that this appeal that was put forward by the New South Wales Police Force to the High Court has to be politically motivated. There has to be back channels. And this is just speculation from certain political actors in Australia or foreign interest groups and lobbies, God forbid, towards the New South Wales Police to do this in the first place. Because if as we've just said, if there was no safety concerns prior to this, if all the demonstrations have been peaceful, why now suddenly are there concerns for safety? Is one Hezbollah flag, a signal that they're going to turn violent? Because I don't think waving a flag, regardless of whether you agree with that symbol or said position, is necessarily violent.
No, definitely not.
So I do think that there was definite political motivation behind that.
Jordie, haven't you heard? Opinions are violence these days, mate.
So is waving flags.
Yeah, so is waving flags.
That's exactly right.
But again, this also shows, like, not just in Australia, there's massive Middle Eastern communities, Palestinians, Lebanese, Iraqis, Syrians. Australia's a very diverse, multicultural
They've been
country.
here for generations.
That's one of the things that makes Australia, in my opinion, a fantastic country.
Could not agree more.
However, all over the Middle Eastern world as well, we've seen these huge demonstrations and outpourings for Nasrallah. So in Iran, I believe, I think yesterday or the day before, Ayatollah Khomeini came out and did the prayers, their weekly prayer session. There's over a million Iranians attending. We've seen, like Iraq, Syria, Yemen, all massive outpourings of support for Nasrallah as well. I even saw footage of in Bahrain, which is just like a straight up dictatorship. I'm pretty sure it only exists as a place for one of the American Navy fleets to dock, essentially, is like an outpost. But they've had massive outpourings of support as well. And again, as we mentioned earlier, it's not just amongst Shia Muslims; it's the Sunnis and Christians as well. So I think it kind of shows which way the winds are kind of blowing in terms of global opinion. And it'd be interesting to see.
And in the past 24 hours, since I checked this morning, Israel has bombed the major highway into Lebanon, which links Syria into Lebanon. And Syria is kind of the conduit for people fleeing the war at the moment to leave Lebanon. Lots of Lebanese, and there's lots of Syrians inside Lebanon. So that was their main way out back into Syria. That highway has been bombed. And that's also has stopped Iranian leaders and politicians being able to fly into Damascus, into Syria from Iran, and then going into Lebanon. So what the Israelis are trying to do is they're trying to isolate Lebanon, saturation bombing inside Lebanon, and really try and bring the entire country to its knees.
I think so, I think if we look at what they've done in Gaza as kind of a microcosm, that is, if we expand that out on a national level, I think that's what they would like to do.
And this isn't just speculation. This is the position that the Israeli, I believe it was, whether it was a military official or a politician, said that we will turn Beirut into Gaza. They said this openly. This is not me paraphrasing.
No.
So.
And it just shows it's terrifying. And that's why I think what forces are stopping this from happening? Who are the only military forces who are opposing them in the region? Or like Hezbollah.
Yeah.
And the forces that are, the Iranian terrorist backed groups again. So it really does show we're not doing anything about it. We're not stopping the Israelis from doing anything. The Americans aren't. The Turks, although Erdogan is my favorite watermelon salesman, he's talking a big talk, but he's not doing that, I don't think, out of like some altruistic desire. I think he's doing it because he doesn't want another flood of refugees into his country. They've already got a couple million Syrian refugees, from a crisis that he helped spur on. He does not want to be responsible for more refugees into his country as well.
You bring up an interesting point, is that a lot of the kind of the right wing here in Australia, or in the West really, are so concerned about immigration. And this has displaced over 1 million Lebanese.
Yeah, within 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Insane. Yeah.
And what do you think is going to happen to this region as Israel continues to attack its neighbors and destabilize it? There's going to be more refugees coming into Western Europe, possibly into Australia. We've seen, I think,
Asia,
in the past year, we've taken in, I think, about 1,000 or 2,000 Palestinian refugees.
Yeah.
So as Israel continues to destabilize the area, we're going to see a mass increase in refugees, which is something never mentioned by the incredible supporters of Israel here in Australia.
Yes. Yeah.
And at the same time, we're going to see possibly massive spikes in the price of fuel and in oil.
Absolutely. And before we get onto that, though, sorry, all I was going to say is, including Israel as well, lots of their citizens have left back to their home countries. In fact, the Russian government came out. I believe there's about 1.5 million Russian Israelis. And the Russian government came out and said, we advise that you get out of Israel ASAP. So again, it's putting more of these people not where they are currently living, essentially. Yes. Please continue with what you were saying.
No, I was just going to say that we are now currently waiting for a retaliatory strike by Israel onto Iran, which they said they're going to do. They have threatened to target Iranian nuclear facilities. Joe Biden has cautioned against that and said that they would not like that to happen. Instead, there's been speculation whether they would target Iranian oil facilities instead.
Yes.
And he said this during a
press conference.
Not a press conference. So he was on the runway, getting off a plane or onto a plane, and a reporter put a microphone up to him and said, he word for word said, are we going to allow Israel to strike Iranian oil facilities? And he said, we're not going to allow Israel to do anything. We will help facilitate. We will advise Israel, because I'm going to say we don't allow them. We're just, we're giving them.
We're not the ones that give them permission to do things. No.
But when he said that there was a possibility, he didn't deny the fact that Israel may strike Iranian oil facilities. The price of a barrel of oil spiked by 25% in a matter of hours. I just thought that was incredible.
Yeah. And I think also from Joe Biden's point of view as well, coming into an election, we have to remember lots of this comes back to domestic politics, both in Israel and the United States. That does affect decision making. For them, they don't want to have an energy crisis, a couple months out from an election. That's the last thing you want. That's the last thing they want is for that destabilization.
Conflict to escalate more and more.
Exactly.
However, I believe we really are on the precipice of this just turning out into a regional ongoing conflict, which is what we're really seeing.
And again, I think as far as the Israeli government is concerned, Benjamin Netanyahu's political survival is dependent on this conflict being perpetuating. Even say what you will about the man, he's obviously an asshole. Right? But his ability to survive politically is second to none. He has literally waged a genocide in order to keep his political career going.
Yes.
I do not like the man. I don't support any of his decisions, but I have to respect his political cunning, his cunning, of course.
Yeah.
And as well, he's been very unpopular in Israel domestically after the assassination of Nasrallah.
He's rallied the country
behind him again. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. In regards to energy security and energy prices as well, the Iranian, to my knowledge, obviously, I'm not a military man. Obviously, I don't understand. I'm personally not well versed in military kind of tactics and strategy. But Iran, to my knowledge, they're one of a main pillar of their defensive doctrine is that look, if we get struck by the US or by Israel, we have the capability to not only strike every single US base in the Middle East, but we can wipe out all of the Gulf states' oil-producing facilities. We can close off the Straits of Hormuz, which is I think it's like a quarter of global oil comes out of there. And that will, again, cripple the energy market further. So they have always had that kind of escalatory dominance in that particular region. And I don't think that's something they'd want to do as well, especially not since they have started to develop a better relationship with the Saudis and the Gulf states as well, especially via BRICS and stuff like that, for example. But again, that would be even more catastrophic for the entire globe.
Correct.
And so escalation's bad for everyone. It's not good for anyone.
Speaking of escalation, as we sort of wrap up what we're discussing at the moment, I did see this morning as well, is that the Israeli airstrikes into Syria were dangerously close to Russian military installments.
Exactly, yes.
So this is where there's kind of another angle which hasn't really been discussed anywhere in the media that I've seen, is that Russia obviously is a very close ally to Syria. It supported Syria when the West And as we previously discussed before, ISIS waged a very dirty war against the Syrian government, and Russia has major military installments and infrastructure inside Syria. And
they have a naval base on the Mediterranean coast,
correct.
Antakya, which is vital.
And those Israeli airstrikes, I believe, were very, very dangerously close to Russian installments.
And I think it's interesting as well because Russia has always had a good relationship with Israel.
Yes, that's right.
A large proportion of Israeli citizens are of kind of Russian origin, and they've always had a good relationship. I do remember though, probably about a year and a half ago, possibly when the Ukraine war was kind of a bit more the center of focus, there was some information that came out about how the Israelis were actually funneling weapons towards the Ukrainians. And I believe that kind of did cause a bit of a diplomatic division between Russia and Israel. And I guess this is further widening that division. Whereas as Israel, if I was them, I'd want to be able to keep as many people, as you're getting further and further isolated from global opinion, I think it would be tactically smart to keep as many people close to you as possible, as many of the nations. However, it seems they are really just barreling, going straight into the arms of the Anglo sphere, the US Anglo military bloc, and away from any other kind of paths to integration, essentially.
So, I guess we should probably wrap up discussing about Israel.
Yes.
Because you've also been looking at something else that's going on.
Like everything, Jordie, this does kind of tie back into Israel and, kind of imperial expenditure abroad, because what's happened is last week in the United States, we had a hurricane by the name of Hurricane Helene slam into the US on the southeastern coast. So I believe it hit like Florida and has just, essentially wreaked a lot of damage across Georgia, Tennessee, North and South Carolina. I believe there might be one or two more. But this has been catastrophic. It's been described as the worst hurricane since Katrina in 2005, which they still have not, New Orleans and Louisiana parts, they still have never recovered from Hurricane Katrina. So far, there's about 215 people have been reported killed. About 700,000 people are without power. However, the reality of it is whole towns, communities, counties have been isolated. So this is all still a bit of speculation at the moment. In classic American fashion, both sides are kind of attacking each other. So all the right wingers are coming out and saying, "Oh, you know what I mean? This is all the fault of Biden. Rah, rah, Donald Trump would have fixed this." There was a fantastic clip of Lindsey Graham, everyone's favorite skinwalker, everyone's favorite deep state reptile, coming out and essentially in an interview.
I believe we have the clip. We can play.
Can we get this up? Because this is my favorite piece of the week. Absolutely. Lindsey Graham, there is no pretense.
Oh, 1 second. I believe we do have the video here.
Yes, here we go. Perfect.
Give me 1 second.
Please excuse us, guys.
President Trump would be all over this. Starlink has been a godsend. So I hope people are looking at what's happening Trump here. And Elon you talk about money.
You can thank Donald Trump and Elon Musk for that.
I've been going all over South Carolina like most people. I hadn't slept much. But look what's going on in Israel. Our friends in Israel are surrounded by people that want to kill them, destroy them, a second Holocaust in the making. And Biden says, be proportional. What is the proportional response to people who want to kill you and your family? They're running out of ammunition in Israel. We have to help our friends to keep the war over there from coming here. They're willing to pay for the weapons. Our economy's in shambles. They have been slow walking weapons in Ukraine. Ukrainians have been doing all the fighting. The border is broken. They care more about illegal immigrants than they do anything else, it appears to be. And this needs to stop. And how do you stop it? November the 5th. If you don't do something about it November the 5th, we got nobody to blame but ourselves as American people.
Lindsey Graham, just an absolute oracle. This man I think he has a contractual obligation with his like alien overlords or whatever, that he cannot appear publicly in the media without shilling for overseas conflict. He just shilled 2 wars right there.
Can we appreciate the pivot?
Yes.
The absolute pivot there, because he's a senator from Carolina.
I think he's South Carolina.
He's a senator from South Carolina. Obviously talking about this horrible hurricane that's destroyed his state.
Yeah.
And the pivot there.
Just straight to Israel.
Straight to Israel and supporting Ukraine. There was no transition there or anything. It went from talking about how great Donald Trump and Elon Musk had been for supporting Starlink, and the obviously funds going towards the border could have went towards disaster, and straight towards shilling for a war.
Yes.
And just bang, bang, bang.
Dude, he is.
And talked about how bad the American economy was going.
Yeah.
Yet still tens of billions of dollars going towards both wars.
The economy is that bad at the moment that we have to keep sending billions overseas, and somehow that is going to allow us to respond better at home. This man is, he is my favorite.
Yeah.
He is 100%.
We don't have a political class like that in Australia.
No.
Like you can look at Peter Dutton and the kind of the ghouls, I guess, on the reactionary right spectrum in Australia. We do not have those kinds of figures.
Just someone who's truly insane.
Like we have Bob Catter, we have the kind of Bob Catters, but the almost just the warmongering convictions not there.
Yeah, exactly. And that true disconnect from reality. Like that man is so deep in the closet.
They're fighting our fight over there so that we don't have to fight them over here.
You're going to fight Iran and the US. No worries.
So hang on a second.
But look, just to kind of accentuate the absurdity of this man's statements, like these are some of the poorest states in the United States.
Yeah.
This is
have been deindustrialized.
Absolutely, yes. Some of the worst like healthcare outcomes in the entire country. And while this is all going on, every person that has been affected, they can apply for a one-time payment of $750 of disaster relief by FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Agency. So like the majority of people, their insurance doesn't cover hurricane or flood insurance, for example.
I imagine the insurance companies don't cover it.
Oh, I think some people do, some policies, if you're really wealthy. But again, if you're really wealthy, you're probably not living there.
And vast majority of people probably don't have insurance anyway.
However, while this is all going on, dude, Israel has just secured $8.7 billion aid package, and Ukraine has received another $5.5 billion aid package, bringing their total aid received to $174 billion.
That's a lot of money.
That is insane.
That's incredible.
Yet somehow Lindsey Graham can equate that with needing to send more money to both those theatres of proxy conflict, and at the same time criticize the lack of a response back home based on like poor funding. Incredible. The mental gymnastics this man is capable of. Goodness gracious. Wow. I'm not really sure what more I have to say, man. I guess like in a fashion truly indicative of a dying empire, you just let the home front crumble and just send more money overseas, more conflict, just as Lindsey Graham wants it. I honestly think
fund the forever wars.
Fund the forever wars. I literally think that Lindsey Graham thought Hamas was a dip up until about a year ago.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
Oh shit. Oh, what a man.
Well, I was going to say we should probably wrap the stream up.
Wrap it up, mate.
There is one last video for us to look at.
Yes.
I thought it was something sort of wholesome to finish on. Kind of, obviously, we've been discussing about the ongoing war and genocide in the Middle East, and we've just discussed then about the forever ongoing wars that America supports and funds. And one of the great outslayers and journalists that reported on this and brought a lot of information to light that wouldn't have been otherwise was our friend Julian Assange.
Absolutely. Our brother in arms. Possibly him and John Pilger, two of the best Australians.
So we've got a video. This is him speaking for the first time since being released.
And this is in Europe, I believe. Is that correct, Jordie?
Yes, correct. This is in France, I believe. So we'll play this video.
I am not free today because the system worked. I am free today after years of incarceration because I pled guilty to journalism. I pled guilty to seeking information from a source. I pled guilty to obtaining information from a source. And I pled guilty to informing the public what that information was. I did not plead guilty to anything else. I hope my testimony today can serve to highlight the weaknesses of the existing safeguards and to help those whose cases are less visible but who are equally vulnerable.
So
we need more Julian Assange.
Pretty much, yeah. As he said, he goes, I plead guilty to journalism. And that's what he had done. So,
yeah. And also, I think important to remember that there was a constant organised public support for his release in the entire time.
Yeah.
And I think without that constant pressure globally, in Australia, in Europe, in the US, you know, like literally everywhere in the world, it became, you know, kind of the example of this. And I think without that, he would not be free.
Yeah.
And I think it is important to remember that organised public responses that can put pressure on governments does work.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can kind of get a bit overwhelmed with everything, and you can kind of maybe lose the hope that you have that your voice actually means anything.
Yeah.
But it does, and this is proof of it.
No, of course, definitely.
It's pretty awesome that's happened, in my opinion.
All right, mate. Well, let's wrap it up.
Wrap it up.
Cool. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Apologies if there was any kind of issues with the video or the audio. As I said, we're using a new streaming software. We want to be able to integrate this better, so in the future we can watch videos and comment on things and have guests on.
Yes. So, look, everyone, if you enjoyed it, leave some feedback, like, comment, and subscribe.
Yeah.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.